we've been doing this for quite some time now. And this morning, on this Papamocani Ekadashi, we have the ability to speak about two personalities. So we'll be sharing this session with two very special personalities, Srivasa Pandit and Govinda Ghosa. So just recently we had the appearance day of Srivasa Pandit, and tomorrow we'll be honoring Govinda Ghosa. So I thought, why not, since we're sandwiched in between, why not honor them both? But of course, we can't begin without our short and sweet Mangalacharna. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashtatya Desatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So we'll begin by speaking a little bit about Srivasa Pandit. Srivasa Pandit is older than Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and we find out about many of his pastimes within Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita and Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat, which happen to be our two shining lights, our two primary resources for many of these Ekadashi lectures. But we also hear about him from Bhakti Ratnakar, which is our great biography of all of the associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Srivasa Acarya, who is sometimes called Srinivas, but not to be confused with the second generation Srinivas. So then he's Srivasa Pandit. He is known as the incarnation of the devotee, which isn't Mahaprabhu also an incarnation of the Lord as the devotee? But here we have the prime example of the devotee in full. Mahaprabhu has come to show how to surrender to Krishna. Nityananda Prabhu has also come to show devotion to Krishna. Advaita Acharya has also come to show this Bhakta avatar, this great incarnation of devotional service. But Srivasa Acharya, Srivasa Pandit, who is affectionately given the title of Pandit, has come to incidentally and in such a beautiful way, he's come to show the mood of a devotee. He is the incarnation of Narada Muni. So it's like he's the final piece in our transcendental quintet, our Panchatattva in 5 features. So we have the form of divinity showing exactly what it means to be a devotee, what it means to have humility, what it means when Mahaprabhu speaks that famous Shikshastakam verse, Trinadapi Sunichena, Taroravi Sahishnina Manina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari, to show what it means to be able to chant the holy names constantly, thinking oneself lower than a straw in the street, more humble than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree. So Srivas has come to show what all of this actually means in complete real time, in real practice. So Srivas and his wife Malini were actually very close friends of Shachi Devi and Jagannath Mishra, the beloved parents of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Malini Devi actually assists in delivering Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on that full moon Gaur Purnima night when Mahaprabhu appears. So Jagannath Mishra and Sachi Devi, when they realize that her due date is close, actually, Sachi Devi was pregnant for quite a few months longer than the usual 9 months that we hear of for pregnancy. But when she realizes that it is close for the time for the baby to be born, they call upon Malini. And she comes to help deliver little Nimai. And so she's almost like a nurse to him. So he gives them such affection. He considers himself to be like a second son for Srivas and Malini. And not only is Srivas and Malini quite affectionate toward Mahaprabhu, but they're extremely affectionate toward Lord Nityananda. In fact, Lord Nityananda stays in the house of Srivas for quite some time. And it's said that when Lord Nityananda is there, his behavior is quite eccentric. He's known as an avadut, so his behavior is quite unique. A little impossible to understand what he'll do next. And so when he's there, he refuses to even eat unless Malini feeds him with her own hands. So she would personally every day sit down and feed Lord Nityananda. And we might think of this as interesting because Lord Nityananda was a grown person by this time. He wasn't a child, but he was so affectionate towards Srivas and Malini that he would refuse everything unless and until she fed him personally with her own hands. This kind of affection, you'd think, might make a devotee proud. But Srivas was never proud. He was simply eager to serve. It's said within Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat that he would sit with Advaita Acarya prior to the advent of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And they would read Bhagavatam together. And they would chant the holy names together. And together they would pray and pray and pray for some kind of deliverance. At this time, the devotees were not able to chant the holy names. And we've spoken about this before many times. That the devotees, due to the other religious factions, the Muslims and others, they were prohibited from chanting openly. They were prohibited from relishing the topics of Krishna consciousness, from practicing their bhakti yoga openly. Can we imagine? We are, most of us, if not all of us, on these live streams, living in a place where governed by the government, we are able to freely practice our Krishna consciousness. And if someone were to stop us, we'd be outraged. We'd feel such indignation. How could you? This is my right to be able to practice what I feel within my heart. It's my right to be able to worship according to my heart's desire. And of course, there are many places still today where people are not able to worship freely and openly. But this was the case for the devotees just prior to the advent of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And they knew that only an incarnation of the Lord would be able to deliver them from such an oppressive condition. It makes me realize just what would we have had if Mahaprabhu had not come It just imagine, not being able to gather, not being able to speak freely, not being able to just post whenever we feel like, all across social media, the glories of our Krishna, the glories of our dearmost friend. Imagine being so heavily censored. It's quite amazing to even try and think of all of that bearing down on the heart. But this was the condition that induced Srivasa Pandit and Advaita Acarya to pray heartily for an incarnation to appear and save them from this oppressive condition. It was with tears in their eyes and a heart full of longing that they prayed. Sometimes when we're praying, the idea is so lofty and far off that, oh Krishna, I was with you, but now I'm separated from you. And now I'm longing to reestablish my relationship with you. I'm longing to reconnect with you. Sometimes that idea is so high and lofty and far off that we find it difficult to even get past the superficial level of prayer in order to go deeply and connect it with our heartfelt feelings. But when we're in trouble, when we are feeling afraid, when we are in deep, deep need of shelter, then somehow or other, that connection happens instantaneously. We're able to drop into that heart center and really pray from a place of necessity. So it is with this sense of urgency, this deep-seated need, right? It's from this place of necessity that Srivasa Pandit and Advaita Acarya are praying. And I guess, it shows us that praying in times of necessity is natural. Sometimes we think, oh, if I were a pure devotee, I would just be praying always. I shouldn't just pray in times of necessity. I should pray when I need it. I should pray when I don't think I need it. I should just be praying all the time. And that's true. But it's also natural when we are in trouble. It's natural when we feel that fire from the material energy beneath us. It's natural to pray. And it's natural to pray with that sense of urgency. And I find these examples uplifting. I find them encouraging. Because with that feeling of this is natural. I shouldn't feel bad if, okay, I'm in trouble and now I turn to Krishna. That's okay. This is the mood that induced Mahaprabhu to advent himself. This mood of, oh my Lord, we need you. There is no other way that we will be able to maintain our lives. No other way that we'll be able to maintain our Krishna consciousness. No other way that we'll be able to maintain our spirituality unless you personally make your appearance in our lives, in the lives of others, in this material world itself. Unless you place your lotus feet on the earth, we don't know how we'll continue. So it's natural. And that should be encouraging. It should encourage us to just keep going no matter what. Whether in happiness or distress, let us pray. Whether in times of incredible urgency, or when everything is sunny outside and things are great, let's hope that we can all encourage one another to keep praying. So Srivasa Pandit and Advaita Acarya, together they would pray, and this is the reason that we have Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu would inaugurate the chanting of the holy name, the Sankirtan movement, the very movement for which he made his appearance, the purpose behind his entire appearance, he would inaugurate that movement within the courtyard of Srivasa Pandit's home. That was the birthplace of this great revolution, this bhakti revolution. How fortunate is Srivasa? And in many of those wonderful kirtans, which often happen nocturnally, those nocturnal kirtans that would happen all through the night, where Mahaprabhu would exhibit limitless amounts of transcendental ecstasy while singing and chanting with his dearest associates. It was like the inner circle, like a secret club. You couldn't get in unless you knew the password, unless Mahaprabhu deemed you worthy. And we'll hear shortly of many people who didn't get entrance into the chanting in Srivasa Sangan, in Srivasa Pandit's courtyard. But this was the very birthplace. This is where the holy name would begin to bloom. The fortune of Srivasa Pandit is immeasurable. Absolutely immeasurable. But it never made him proud. We heard a few sessions ago, during the pastimes and the glories of Devananda Pandit. Devananda Pandit would preach Srimad Bhagavatam. Always. He would preach nothing else but Srimad Bhagavatam. But somehow he would preach Srimad Bhagavatam and never touch upon devotional service. He would never preach from a place of bhakti. It was all scholarly, academic. And this made his heart such an unpleasant place for the Lord to reside. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur says that it made his heart an irritant. It would irritate Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu so much to the point where Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would leave that place. And we spoke about how normally we hear that the Lord within the heart never wants to leave you for any reason. But in the case of Devananda Pandit, he had totally disregarded bhakti. He gave no importance to devotional service and loving devotional service. And this caused Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Lord of Lords, the Lord within everyone's heart, to become so irritated that he didn't even want to stay within the heart of Devananda Pandit. One day, as Devananda Pandit was preaching, Srivasa heard the glories of Sri Krishna being spoken from Srimad Bhagavatam, and he sits in that assembly. And he begins to become overwhelmed with transcendental ecstasy. He begins to cry and breathe heavily. And he's sighing and heaving heavy sighs, thinking of himself being so separated from Krishna. Finally, the students in the assembly, they think, oh, we can't possibly concentrate with this person here crying and going into ecstasy and all of these things. How are we going to listen attentively? And so finally they decide, let's remove him from this assembly. And they pick him up, and they remove him, and they drop him outside. Srivasa had kind of gone into a state of unconsciousness. When he returns to his external consciousness, he is outside of the assembly, and he thinks, oh, what has happened? But he's sad that he can't hear the glories of Sri Krishna, but not angry with Devananda Pandit at all. He simply goes home, where he continues to relish the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam on his own. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, however, is so angry that he rebukes Devananda Pandit over and over and over again. Tells him that he will never be a recipient of Sri Krishna's mercy due to the offense that was committed on his watch. But Srivas never took any offense whatsoever. Srivas is a senior devotee. If that had happened to me, I'm not sure that I would have the fortitude, the wherewithal to think, this is Krishna's arrangement. Let me just practice on my own at home. Let me just read on my own, no problem. If I had been forcibly lifted up and booted from an assembly, I can feel slightly offended even if something happens and there's a technological glitch and I'm booted out from this Zoom call. Right? And that's not even the fault of anybody. It's just the technology and the internet. Here, Srivas was physically removed from this assembly of students. But he never took any offense, none whatsoever. But we also get a very poignant lesson in what happens when the devotee does not take offense. Right? We often hear one should be more humble than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree, ready to offer all respects to others and expect none in return. This is how we get to chant the holy name in a constant state of mind. Usually, we are told this by the person who's doing the offending. Right? As a way of saying, listen, don't mind. Don't take any offense. Because as a devotee, you shouldn't. You should be more humble. You should be more tolerant. Willing to offer all respects. So as we are often told this as a cautionary tale, but what happens when the devotee really takes up that edict? What happens when we really take that to heart and we actually follow it? It doesn't mean that we are simply left to be abused and oppressed. Then it means that the Lord personally, He personally comes to have our backs. In this case, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rebuked Devananda Pandit over and over and over again. Said, you'll never have my association. That's it. I don't ever want to be near you. I don't ever want to see you. And it was many years before Devananda Pandit was able to get back in the good graces of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he was only able to do that by associating with another devotee, Vakreshwar Pandit. And so we've spoken about this many times, but in the case of Durvasa Muni, when he goes and he wants to completely destroy Ambarish Maharaj with a curse because he feels like he's been offended. Factually, there was no offense. But Durvasa Muni, he decided that there was. So he curses Ambarish, unleashes a demon to try and kill him. And Ambarish Maharaj, he doesn't take any offense. But what happens when the devotee does that? Shri Krishna says, if my devotee refuses to protect himself, if he thinks, oh, Krishna is my maintainer, my protector, Krishna is my all in all, I can't take any offense, then I personally go and I protect him with all of my paraphernalia. And so in the case of Durvasa Muni, he's now being chased by the Sudarshan Chakra, which is not just a weapon, not just an object, but a personality. Living, breathing, thinking, sentient personality. Who can run away from a person? You might be able to outrun an object and dodge and weave or something, but this is a person with precision. He has to go back and fall at the feet of Ambarish Maharaj in order to free himself from this grave predicament. So what happens when we are really more humble than a blade of grass and more tolerant than a tree? Whether we hear this from a well-wisher or whether we are reminded of this from even an oppressor, we can remember these wonderful pastimes and these examples, and we can remind ourselves in our hearts that this may hurt. This is a sad situation that I've been placed in. But if I place my trust and my faith in Krishna, I know that he'll personally appear and protect me in some form or other. This is the example of Srivasa Pandit. Mahaprabhu several times, he would come to his very own aid. Before we launch into the several ways that Mahaprabhu comes to the aid of Srivasa Pandit, when Lord Nityananda was staying at the house of Srivasa and Malini, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would ask him, you know this Nitai, he's an avadut. He's a transcendental madman. No one knows where he comes from. No one knows what his background is. No one knows what his family life is like. No one even knows if he's a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, outcast. No one knows what his Varna is or his ashram is. Why do you let him stay here? Why do you let him stay in your house and do all kinds of activities? Srivasa says, my love for Nityananda knows no bounds. I cannot give up my affection for him for any reason. There's absolutely nothing in this world or beyond that would make me give up my affection for Sri Nityananda Prabhu. And then Srivasa says, even with a laugh, because even he knows, he says, even if I personally were to see Lord Nityananda walk into a bar, get totally drunk on wine, and associate with all kinds of questionable women, I still wouldn't give up my affection for him. Basically saying there's nothing. He could do the worst thing ever, seemingly. He could do seemingly the worst thing, and still I would not give him up. I would let him stay in my house. I would let my wife feed him by hand. There would be nothing. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu he goes into complete ecstasy upon hearing this. He says, you have understood. You are the most dear to us both. Oh, Srivasa, you are my life and soul. You have taken up the care of Lord Nityananda so nicely. You are like my life and soul. And they laughed together about this incident. So, from the pages of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, we hear that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu regularly led congregational chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra in the house of Srivasa Pandit every night for 1 full year. This ecstatic chanting was performed with the doors closed so that non-believers who came to make fun could not gain entrance. Thus the non-believers almost burned to ashes and died out of envy. To retaliate, they planned various ways to give trouble to Srivasa Pandit. So this is like, we can see that trolls is not just a modern day thing. Right? We see that even 500 years ago, in the time of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there were these trolls who were going to give trouble to those who were just doing their best to preach the glories of the holy name. One night, while kirtan was going on inside Srivasa Pandit's house, a Brahmin named Gopal Chapal The chief of the non-believers, who was talkative and very rough in his speech, placed all the paraphernalia for worshipping the goddess Durga outside Srivasa Thakur's door. He placed a pot of wine beside all the paraphernalia. And in the morning, when Srivasa Thakur opened his door, he saw all this paraphernalia. So Srila Prabhupada describes, and he gives the purport, that there was often a little bit of a rivalry between the Vaishnavas and the Shaktas. There was somehow a bitter rivalry going on between the worshippers of Lord Vishnu and the worshippers of Parvati Devi and Lord Shiva. This can sound quite astonishing, considering that Lord Vishnu and Lord Shiva don't have a rivalry. They don't have any problem at all. In so many cases within Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, within Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat, within the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya written down by Murari Gupta, it's spoken about how Lord Shiva is the most favorite devotee of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, considered the very best friend of Sri Krishna. It's almost considered that the worship of Sri Krishna is incomplete if you don't acknowledge the greatest of all Vaishnavas, Lord Shiva. But somehow the followers developed this competitive nature where they constantly compared. Who is better? One must be better than the other. But Shiva doesn't have this problem. He says, I bow my head to the lotus feet of my worshipable Lord, Lord Govinda. I forever worship Lord Sankarshan. The actual origin of Sankarshan, Mahavishnu, all the Vishnus, is none other than Sri Nityananda Prabhu. Lord Shiva doesn't have any problem. But the followers had a problem. So now they put all of the paraphernalia of a Shakta outside the door of Srivasa Pandit to say, look, he claims to be a big Vaishnava, but secretly he's worshipping the goddess Durga. Secretly he's worshipping Chandi. Look, what a big hypocrite. Everyone come see. So they put all this paraphernalia outside the door of Srivasa Pandit. Srivasa Pandit, seeing all this paraphernalia outside his door, he calls for all the respectable gentlemen of the neighborhood, and he smilingly addressed them as follows. Gentlemen, every night I worship the goddess Bhavani. Since the paraphernalia for the worship is present here, now all you respectable brahmanas and members of the higher castes can see my actual position. Not only does he not refute all of the things that were there, he buys into it. Yes, absolutely. Every night I say I'm a big Vaishnava, but actually here, you can see, I've been worshipping the goddess Bhavani. Now, this is an extreme case of humility. When we come upon these situations, do we allow, in certain cases, do we jump into being a doormat or being mistreated? No, we shouldn't. And this is where it comes into play that we can't imitate the great Vaishnava Acaryas, right? We can't imitate the greatest teachers. We can apply their teachings and follow in their footsteps, but to imitate, my Guru Maharaj lovingly said in one lecture, if you try and imitate, you'll die. This kind of humility, this extreme humility is impossible for us to imbibe. But Srivas, he says, look, all of you can see, it's here, plain as day before your very eyes, no problem. Because he knows he has such faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He has such faith in Krishna. He has such incredible faith in his Mahaprabhu. He knows nothing will ever break, vanquish, erode the bond that I have with my Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's the strength of the conviction of his devotion. This is what we can try and cultivate when we chant. We might not be able to imitate this. In fact, we definitely can't imitate it. But this is the mood that we can try and imbibe. This conviction that I have a personal bond with my Krishna. I have a personal bond with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And there is nothing that anyone will ever be able to say about me, to me, because of me. Nothing that anyone will ever be able to say or do that will break apart that bond. Nothing can erode that bond. Nothing can vanquish it. There is nothing in this world that can break the bond that each of us have personally with Sri Krishna. This was the strength that Srivasa Thakur, Srivasa Pandit draws from. So all assembled, they exclaimed, what is this? Who has done such a mischievous thing? Who is that sinful person? They called for someone to come and throw all those things away and clean the area thoroughly. And then, after 3 days, Chapal Gopal, or Gopal Chapal as he is often called, was attacked by leprosy. Blood oozed from sores all over his body. He was incessantly covered with germs and insects biting him all over his body. Gopal Chapal felt unbearable pain. His entire body burned in distress. Since leprosy is an infectious disease, Chapal Gopal had to leave the village to sit down on the banks of the Ganga underneath the tree. One day, however, he saw Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu passing by and spoke to him as follows. He said, "My dear nephew, I am your maternal uncle in our village relationship. Please see how greatly this attack of leprosy has affected me. As an incarnation of God, you are delivering so many fallen souls. I am also a greatly unhappy fallen soul. Kindly deliver me by your mercy." Hearing this, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared greatly angry, and in that angry mood, he spoke some words chastising him. Mahaprabhu said, "O sinful person, envious of pure devotees, I shall not deliver you. Rather, I shall have you bitten by these germs for many millions of years. You suffer like this. You have made Srivasa Thakur appear to have been worshipping the goddess Bhavani. Simply for this offense, you will have to fall down into hellish life for 10 million births. I have appeared in this incarnation to kill the demons, the pasandis, and after killing them, to preach the cult of devotional service." After saying this, the Lord left to take his bath in the Ganges, and that sinful man did not give up his life, but he continued to suffer. Mahaprabhu spends some years. Then he accepts sannyas. He goes to Jagannath Puri. Then finally he comes back to the village of Kulia. And once again, Chapal Gopal takes shelter at the Lord's lotus feet. Finally, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tells him, "You have committed an offense at the lotus feet of Srivasa Pandit. First, you must go there and beg for his mercy. And then if he gives you his blessings, and if you never commit such sinful acts again, then you will be freed from these reactions." The Brahmin Chapal Gopal went to Srivasa Thakur and took shelter of his lotus feet, and by Srivasa Pandit's mercy, he was freed from all sinful reactions. So we see how Mahaprabhu takes personal offense if there is some offense committed toward his devotees, even if they don't claim to be offended. I find it so encouraging that our Lord doesn't just sit idly by and think, "Oh, my devotee is going through some trouble. It's up to them to figure it out." what he says is, I am impartial by nature, equal to devotees and non-devotees, but everyone is under the jurisdiction of my material energy. None other than the goddess Bhavani herself, Durga Devi. And while I do remain impartial to both sides, my devotees who worship me with love and affection, they have bound me. I'm helpless. What can I do? Now, it's very interesting for the Lord of the universe to say, I'm helpless. What can I do? But he says, I'm bound through ties of affection. They have made me their intimate relative. And through those ties of affection, because I am absolutely reciprocal, I reciprocate perfectly and completely according to each person's inner desires and their inner mood. Because of this, I have to reciprocate. How do I reciprocate with my loving devotees? Those who have worshipped me, I take a very active and present role in their lives. So he doesn't just sit idly by and think, oh, my devotee has to handle it themselves. He thinks now it is my job, my personal duty to act within the lives of my devotees. This brings us to Govinda Ghosa, with just a couple minutes to spare. Govinda Ghosa was often present in the kirtan pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Govinda Ghosa was present, and he knew Srivasa Pandit. Govinda Ghosa was one of three brothers. There was Govinda Ghosa, Vasudeva Ghosa, and Madhava Ghosa, which often make me think of my three nephews, and it makes my sister also think of her three boys, Govinda, Vasudeva, and Keshava Madhava. So Govinda, Vasudeva, and Madhava Ghosa, they were famous for their kirtan. They would sing so sweetly, Gaur Ganudesh Dipika, who talks about the glories of all the associates of Mahaprabhu. They say there were three gopis. They are the incarnations of three gopis who would constantly sing the compositions of Vishaka Devi to bring joy to the divine couple Shri Radha Govinda. Now they have come and they sing sweetly and they compose poetry and songs to give joy to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Nityananda Prabhu. Govinda Ghosa was called Ghosh Thakur. He was the foremost of the three brothers. And he would sing so sweetly. Mahaprabhu would dance during the Rath Yatra festival when Govinda Ghosa and Vasudev Ghosa were leading. Madhava Ghosa would also lead and accompany, and all three brothers would create such a beautiful atmosphere that Mahaprabhu would dance and dance and dance. They would sing the holy names, but they would also sing Hari Haraya Nama Krishna Yadavaya Namaha Gopal Govindaram Shri Madhusudan. So they would sing this popularly over and over again. And Mahaprabhu would dance in so many wonderful ways, astonishing all of the devotees. Govinda Ghosa was given the task of worshipping a deity of Gopinath. Actually, he was bathing one day and he felt something kind of bump him in the back as he was bathing and offering his morning rituals. As he turned, he saw this amazing floating object. It appeared to be some sort of wood, but it was considerably heavy. That night, in a dream, he received divine directions to preserve that wood with care and then to hand it over to Lord Chaitanya. So when Govinda went to fetch the wood, he realized that it was now a Krishna Shila. The next morning, Lord Chaitanya turned up in Govinda's house and said, "Look, Govinda, you have nothing to worry about anymore. Tomorrow, one sculptor will come and chisel a deity from this Shila, and you should install that deity." And thus the deity of Gopinath was installed. Govinda Ghosa would worship that beautiful deity of Gopinath, he was married and he had a son. And shortly, one after another, both his wife and his son passed away. Govinda Ghosa was so upset. He was in such a mood of despair that he gave up worshipping Gopinath. He was so depressed that he wouldn't worship his deity at all. Finally, one day, Lord Krishna appeared to Govinda Ghosa in a dream. And he said, "Hey Govinda!" How sweet. He says, "Hey Govinda, do you think it's proper that when a person loses a son, that he should then also starve his other son to death? You've been caring for me like your very own son. Now I understand you've lost one son, but now I'm hungry." Govinda Ghosa says, "My lord, it was my hope that my son would survive. It was my hope that he would even perform my last rites. It was my hope that my son would carry on my very own legacy. But my son has died. Tell me, what do I gain now from serving you?" Imagine such an intense and close, intimate relationship with the Lord, that now he is rebuking his Gopinath deity. What do I get by worshiping you? No, I won't do it. I'm too depressed. The Lord explains. He says, "I hereby make you a promise. I promise to be like your son and celebrate all your final rites. I will perform your last rites personally. I will take care of all the arrangements. And I will perform your Shraddha ceremony. I will perform your death ceremony, anniversary in a fitting manner forever. Not just when you die, but every year thereafter. I promise you this. Now please, can I have something to eat? I'm very hungry. Can you feed me now?" Govinda Ghosa thinks, "Absolutely, fine. Now I'll worship you again." And he continues his worship of Gopinath and he continues to feed him. And, as it goes, when Govinda Ghosa had his disappearance, when Govinda Ghosa left those earthly pastimes, the deity of Gopinath, he specifically dresses in the way that a son would dress in mourning, holds kusha grass in between his hands where he would hold a flute. He holds this kusha grass now. He's decorated all in white. Usually he would have a crown and curly hair, but all of that is removed so that he looks just like a son performing the final rites of his father. Every year on the disappearance of Govinda Ghosa, which will be celebrated tomorrow. If I can find pictures, because I've seen them before, he's a beautiful deity of Gopinath, but he's dressed all in white. All of his jewelry is taken. Everything is very simply done. And every year, forever, he honors Govinda Ghosa. This is the way the Lord takes an active role in the life of the devotee. So not only did Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu take an active role in the lives of Govinda Ghosa, Srivasa Pandit and others, but the deity is so present. The deity is so alive. The deity is so powerful that this deity develops an undying, unending relationship with the devotee. So we can think about this as we serve our deities, whether they are within our homes, within our temples. We can think of these wonderful, encouraging pastimes. And we know that each of us, every single one of us, has a deep-seated relationship with Krishna that is unbreakable, unable to be vanquished. Srila Prabhupada uses that word in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam as a purport. where he says that each of us have an unbreakable, unvanquished relationship with Krishna. Can't be eroded. Can't be worn down. Not by anyone, even ourselves. And the Lord will take an active role in our lives. So this is what happens when we embrace this mood of humility. And when we develop our relationship with the Lord in a very real way. This is the mood in which we can chant. This is the mood that we can try and develop and imbibe from these great personalities, Srivasa Pandit and Govinda Ghosa. The mood that Krishna is my mother, Krishna is my father, Krishna is my brother, sister, lover, friend. He is the real treasure of our lives. And I have a relationship with him. Let me reestablish that relationship. Let me reinstall it within the temple of my heart. Let me help this relationship to bloom. We are in the midst of spring, and so everything is now blooming again. Let me make this relationship bloom again. Let me chant with love and attachment. Right? Love and affection, but attachment. Attachment to what? Attachment to that supreme divine directive that I am Krishna's and Krishna is mine. In this way, he's our dearmost friend. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu often told Srivasa, I am like your own son. Srivasa suffered the death of his son. And because Mahaprabhu was in attendance at that time at his house, and the son died in another room, he wouldn't even lament or allow his family to lament. He said, I understand. This is a very difficult situation, but at least cry later. The very moon of Navadvip, Gaura Chandra, Navadvip Chandra is here. Mayapur Chandra is here in our house. How can we be afflicted with sadness or depression when the Supreme Person is right here in our home? He wouldn't even tell Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu being the Paramatma, the very witness within the heart of every living entity. Later on, he calls Srivasa, he says, oh Srivasa, I'm not feeling the same ecstasy as I would normally feel in this kirtan assembly. I feel something depressing must have happened. What has happened in your house? Finally, everyone has to tell Mahaprabhu, well, the son of Srivasa has died. Mahaprabhu says, you didn't tell me. Why? How couldn't you tell me? I'm your dearest friend. I'm no less than your family member. You must tell me these things. You must allow me to console you. The Lord was not hard-hearted. And he tells him in this regard, he says, oh Srivasa, you may have lost one son, but you have two others. You have myself and you have Nityananda. We are your two sons. And I promise you we will be like your two sons forever. When we have the strength and the conviction backing our chanting and our devotion, the Lord takes the most active role in our lives. Saying, I am with you forever. I am your well-wisher. I am your very family member. You can count on me forever and ever and ever. This is the gift given by Srivasa Pandit and Govinda Ghosa. The gift that Krishna is ours forever. And if we pray with that spirit, with that mood, then forever Krishna will take the most active role in our lives. Shri Vaishnava Thakur ki jai, Shri Ekadashi Titi ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Radha Murlidhara ki jai, Shri Radha Govinda Dev ki jai. So thank you so much. Thank you for staying with me as I go overtime. But I felt like it was so key to speak about these lessons from the lives of these Vaishnava Acharyas. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I look forward to being with all of you again next Ekadashi. Jai.